Did you know the story of the Americans who participated in the Spanish Civil War? Let us tell you their story. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. This way you'll support the channel, help it grow, and enjoy watching high-quality, informative videos. Lincoln Washington Battalion. It was a unit composed of American volunteers and members of international brigades who fought on the side of the Republicans in the Spanish Civil War from February 1937 to November 1938. Officially known as the Lincoln Washington Battalion, it would later be referred to as the Lincoln Battalion. The international brigades were formed by the Communist International in late 1936. There were approximately 35,000 fighters from 52 countries. The battalion operated a very well-organized and equipped field hospital, funded and managed by the American Medical Bureau. Organized by Dr. Edward K. Barsky, the American Medical Bureau recruited doctors, dentists, nurses, administrators, and ambulance drivers to support the Spanish Loyalists. There were approximately 3,000 soldiers. More than 1,000 were industrial workers, meaning miners, steel workers, and dock workers, while about 500 were students and teachers. 70% were between 21 and 28 years old. The majority were members of the American Communist Party, others were from the American Socialist and Socialist Workers' Party. There were also participants with anarchist views. The Americans served in the Spanish Civil War with an air group called the Yankee Squadron. However, they were unsuccessful because the planes assigned to them were old and poorly maintained. The American battalion consisted of both white and black soldiers. Black Americans participated in the Spanish Civil War with great volunteerism due to the discrimination and injustices they experienced. Oliver Law, a black American, became the first black unit commander in American history in the Spanish Civil War. In 1937, they formed a separate unit called the George Washington Battalion. However, after suffering heavy losses during the war, they reunited. Citizens from other countries were also accepted into the Lincoln Battalion. By the end of 1938, the battalion had a ratio of 3 Hispanics to 1 American. The Lincoln Battalion's first and most famous commander was Robert Hale Merriman, the son of a lumberjack and a 2-year veteran of the University of Nevada Reserve Officer Training Corps. Along with James Harris, a former sergeant, Merriman taught the soldiers how to disassemble rifles and machine guns. They were trained in reconnaissance, fortifications, and signaling. Merriman rose to the rank of major during the Spanish Civil War. He was appointed Chief of Staff of the 15th International Brigade, which included the Lincoln Battalion. Another organizer of the battalion was Steve Nelson, a Croatian-American activist, worker, and member of the Communist Party. He was born on January 1, 1903, in Subotica, Croatia. His family was of Hungarian descent. In 1920, he, his father, mother, and 3 sisters immigrated to the United States. They settled in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where his uncle lived. They moved to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where his uncle lived. With his uncle's help, he found his first job at a slaughterhouse. He worked in a machine factory, in automobile manufacturing, and in metalworking. Eventually, he became a carpenter, and this became his main source of income. Later, he joined the South Slavic branch of the Socialist Workers' Party. He found the party ineffective. In 1923, he left this party and joined the Young Workers' League of the Communist Party. Because of his background in labor organizing, Steve Nelson played a role in boosting morale, motivating, and leading the command of American volunteers throughout the Spanish Civil War. Philip Leighton Detro was a writer, poet, and sailor who fought in the Republican ranks as a member of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion. He was born on May 19, 1911, in Conroe, Texas. He wanted to become a merchant ship crewman. He attended Rice University. In 1932, he went to Germany, where he became an anti-fascist after listening to a speech by Adolf Hitler. 2 years later, He enrolled in the journalism department at the University of Missouri to pursue a career as a writer. He studied Spanish, but was expelled due to absenteeism. He moved to New York and worked for a writers' union. He served as commander of the Lincoln Battalion during the battles of Fuentes de Ebro and Teruel. He was initially rejected from the volunteer list because he was not a member of the Communist Party. However, his application was accepted due to his service in the Texas National Guard and his Army experience. When asked about his political views, Detro identified himself as a Democrat. He commanded a squadron at Tarazona. At the Battle of Brunete, he took command of Hans Amley's company after Amley was wounded. He participated in the charge known as Mosquito Hill and was wounded. After recovering, he participated in the Battle of Belchite and later became a battalion commander. Detro was known for his humorous personality among his fellow soldiers and those around him. He would make dark jokes to Fred Keller, the political commissar in his battalion, saying, "Where I come from, we shoot communists." Oliver Law was an African-American communist and labor organizer. He had served for 6 years in the Buffalo Troopers Corps in the United States and as a private in the 24th Infantry Regiment, an African-American unit on the Mexican border. He was militarily experienced. Due to racial segregation at the time, the U.S. War Department prevented Law from becoming an officer and rising above the rank of corporal. When he went to Spain and participated in the war, he became the commander of a machine gun platoon. Law was a member of the International Defense of Labor. He joined the Communist Party in 1932. The 2nd Squadron, 1st Train Regiment, was formed to provide logistics for the unit. The 2nd Squadron was predominantly composed of Americans. Its commander was Durward Clark. The Americans had support forces consisting of 2 separate units, John Brown Battery and 35th Battery, with 155 mm guns and field guns. Of the battalion, which totaled around 2,800 American volunteers, approximately 900 lost their lives in the war. Some died later from disease and injuries. The units were disbanded towards the end of 1938, as the war was drawing to a close. Reasons for the outbreak of the war. Groups led by General Francisco Franco, supported by the German Nazi and Italian fascist governments and composed of fascist nationalists, launched the 1936 coup to overthrow the Republican government in Madrid. An international communist conference was held in Prague to garner support for the Spanish Republic against the impending fascist threat. Participants raised funds worth 1 billion francs, including a brigade of 5,000 men. Auxiliary battalions from each country used the names of iconic patriotic historical figures from their respective nations. For example, the Garibaldi Battalion, composed of Italians, and the Connolly Battalion, composed of Irish. Following the Spanish Republican government's call for international aid, a battalion of American volunteers arrived in Spain at the end of 1936. At the same time, a unit called Centuria Gutierrez, composed of Latin American countries, also arrived in Spain. The Lincoln-Washington Battalion began to be organized by Robert Merriman in Figueres, a town near the French border. Initially, the battalion consisted of 3 companies. It consisted of 2 infantry units and 1 machine gun unit. The unit's training was initially rudimentary and amateurish. The beginning of the war. The Battle of Jarama, which took place between February 6 and 27, having failed to capture the capital Madrid with a direct frontal assault, General Francisco Franco crossed the Jarama River on February 11, 1937, with a force of 40,000 men, including men from the Army of Africa, in order to cut off Republican Spain from other regions. As a result of this battle, both the nationalist and Republican sides suffered heavy losses. The American Lincoln Battalion was considerably weakened. In the final assault on February 27, 1937, the units were under the control of Yugoslav Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Kopic. Robert Hale Merriman, the leader of the Lincoln Battalion, recognized the danger. He warned Vladimir Kopek against directly attacking strong nationalist positions. However, Kopek gave the order to attack, saying that air support and armored reinforcements would arrive. In reality, this aid would not arrive. In the Pingarren attack, known as Suicide Hill, the Lincoln Battalion suffered heavy losses, and Robert Merriman was wounded in his left shoulder, breaking 5 bones. After the Battle of Jarama, Robert Merriman was promoted to Major and appointed Chief of Staff of the 15th Brigade. While recovering, he spent much of his time organizing and training international brigades. Oliver Law was promoted to lieutenant at the end of the Battle of Jarama. The next major battle would be the Battle of Brunete, which took place between July 6 and 25, 1937. Steve Nelson was the battalion commander. Mirko Markovic, an American of Yugoslav descent, was appointed commander of the Lincoln-Washington Battalion. Colonel Klaus of the International Brigades ordered Markovic to attack to protect a Spanish Marine company, but he refused, not wanting to repeat the mistake of the Battle of Jarama. Markovic was arrested, and Steve Nelson became commander. Markovic was released. They had armored vehicles and T-26 tanks from the Soviet Union. They were supported by nearly 100 aircraft from the air. Initially, the Republican forces were effective, but ultimately the nationalist forces prevailed. In air battles, German Condor Air Legion aircraft and Italian planes fought against Soviet-made warplanes used by the Republican forces. The fascist forces' aircraft were superior to the Republican forces. This gave Franco's forces air superiority. The July heat made fighting extremely difficult. Soldiers were dying from thirst and extreme heat. Soldiers recounted in their memoirs how they were drenched in sweat and struggled all day against large flies that clung to them. Oliver Law was killed on July 9, dismembered by machine gun fire while leading his men on the front lines against the fortified fascist position at Mosquito Ridge. He became the first black commander in military history to lead an integrated American unit. The 15th Brigade again suffered heavy losses. As a result of this battle, the Lincoln and Washington battalions were merged. The unit was officially known as Lincoln-Washington, but later became the Abraham Lincoln Battalion. Gerda Taro, a female war photographer, died in an accident during these battles. In August 1937, American forces were reorganized. Hans Amley became commander of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion. Steve Nelson was promoted to brigade commander, and Robert Merriman became brigade chief of staff. Between August and October 1937, the Abraham Lincoln Battalion participated in the Aragon Offensive. They fought fiercely at Quinto and Belchite. At Quinto, they launched a combined attack with Soviet T-26 tanks and their crews. The fighting was dangerous, with snipers positioned in church towers and on rooftops. 2 days later, the Americans captured the town from the nationalist forces, taking nearly 1,000 prisoners. Belchite was a fortified town. Nationalist troops had established positions in every street. The fighting was characterized by house-to-house combat and heavy casualties. It had devolved into dangerous street fighting with a high concentration of snipers. Robert Merriman ordered his men to take the town's church, as Franco's forces had established their strongest defenses around it. In the initial attack, 22 men were killed and 2 survived. Steve Nelson considered the capture of the church dangerous and opposed a direct attack. Nelson launched a diversionary attack, allowing Hans Amley and the Lincoln Brigade to enter the town. However, the Americans suffered heavy losses. Today, the town of Belchite stands in ruins, resembling a ghost town. It is preserved in its original state as a memorial to the conflicts of the Spanish Civil War. The scars of the war are visible in the town. Many houses, including the church, are in ruins and dilapidated. In 1938, Francisco Franco's nationalist forces broke through the Republican lines and advanced towards the sea, splitting the battle line in two. As a result, most of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion were killed, missing, or captured. As the unit retreated, their last hope was to reunite, but they disintegrated again. It is believed that Robert Hale Merriman and David Doran, the two highest-ranking American officers in the Lincoln Battalion, were killed at Gandesa on the Aragon front. The bodies of Robert Merriman and David Doran were never found. On January 19, 1938, Philip Leighton Detrow was wounded by sniper fire in the Teruel area. He was transported to a hospital in Mercy, where he died of sepsis. As the influx of volunteers from America decreased in later stages, Spanish citizens began to join the international battalions. These Spanish units formed the majority of the 15th Brigade strength in its final offensive. The Lincoln Battalion participated in the Ebro offensive for the last time. The 15th Brigade crossed the Ebro River and rapidly advanced in the area from which they had retreated in March and April. However, nationalist forces quickly regrouped and halted the offensive. On July 26, the Republican Army attempted to capture Peak 481, a key point in Gandesa. Peak 481 was well protected with barbed wire, trenches, and bunkers. The Republicans suffered heavy losses and were forced to retreat to Peak 666 in the Sierra Pandal Mountains 6 days later. In September, they successfully defended the peak against a fascist assault, but again suffered heavy casualties. During the Battle of Ebro, the Nationalist Army suffered 6,500 killed and approximately 30,000 wounded. These were the heaviest losses of the war. The end of the war and the return of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion. Spanish Prime Minister Juan Negrin was told that the international brigades were no longer relevant, that they had lost their influence and support. On September 21, 1938, Spanish Prime Minister Juan Negrin announced to the League of Nations the unilateral withdrawal of the international brigades from the war. That night, the 15th Brigade and the British Battalion began their journey out of the country, crossing the Ebro River. On November 1, 1938, hundreds of thousands gathered in Barcelona to bid farewell to the International Brigade's fighters who had arrived in Spain. Bill Bailey, a member of the International Brigade's parade held in Barcelona on November 15, 1938, recounted the following: "Everyone who could walk was in the parade, and the streets were filled with people throwing flowers, running to hug and kiss us, their eyes full of tears. It was sad to leave all these wonderful Spaniards at the mercy of Franco. The last words we were told were that wherever we were, we had to continue the anti-fascist struggle. And we did that by doing our best." The capital, Madrid, fell in March 1939, and the Nationalist Axis coalition led by General Francisco Franco entered Madrid. The decision was made to gather the members of the disbanded Lincoln Battalion in Ripoll, a city in Catalonia in northern Spain, for identification and repatriation to the United States. The last remaining fighters from the unit were transferred from there to their homeland. Some members of the Lincoln Battalion who were captured by Franco's forces were last returned to the United States in 1939. At the end of the Spanish Civil War, only 150 known American soldiers from the Lincoln-Washington Battalion survived. Journalist Vincent Sheen, in an article he wrote at the time, commemorated the fighters by saying, "If the world has a future, they have protected it." American writer and journalist Ernest Hemingway wrote the following about the international brigades. "The dead are freezing in Spain tonight. Snow is blowing through the olive groves, striking the tree roots. Snow is swirling over the small snowdrifts of the hills. For our dead are now part of the Spanish soil, and the Spanish soil never dies. Every winter it will seem to die, and every spring it will be reborn. Our dead will live with it forever. Criticisms of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion highlight the excessive harshness of some commanders and political commissars, some of whom were even executed. These decisions are debated from an ethical and humanitarian standpoint. Paul White, a young American, was among those executed. He deserted a mission to procure ammunition and fled across the French border. He learned his wife had given birth. He regretted his actions and decided to return to his unit to fight, hoping his son would be proud of him in the future. However, he was not forgiven by the strict battalion commander, John Gates. He ordered all deserters to be court-martialed and some executed. It was later claimed that the battalion unanimously decided to execute Paul White by firing squad. However, no such unanimous decision was reached within the battalion. Paul's friend from the New York coast, Joe Bianca, knew White's wife had recently given birth and, in a fit of rage, repeatedly shouted, "Sons of bitches," and vomited. Due to growing opposition and outrage over the executions, an order was issued to cancel the executions within the battalion. At the end of the Spanish Civil War, the military documents and administrative records of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion were taken to Moscow as part of the Comintern archives to prevent them from falling into the hands of the fascist General Francisco Franco. These documents are preserved in the State Archive of Russian Social and Political History. The official documents of the International Unit and Brigades include official military bulletins, records of command and headquarters, postal service and censorship, transportation, supplies, training, and prisoners. These records document the organization and operation of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, its relations with other international brigades, its political organizations, and its relations with the Spanish Republican government. When World War II began and the United States entered the war, many American Lincoln Battalion members volunteered to join the Army and merchant fleets that delivered aid to the front. In 1970, a project to collect archives was initiated by veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion. American veterans of the Spanish Civil War decided that the memories of this historic struggle needed to be preserved. They established the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives Organization, known by its short name ALBA. For this purpose, they began collecting letters, writings, oral histories, photographs, posters, artifacts, and temporary documents. The Abraham Lincoln Battalion Archive Collection was initially entrusted to Brandeis University. In December 2000, its records were transferred to the Tamiament Library at New York University. The archive contains approximately 300 separate collections illustrating the life stories of Lincoln Brigade and medical officers. These collections, containing documents belonging to approximately 10% of the U.S. volunteers who fought in Spain, include soldiers, nurses, and doctors. They also contain over 10,000 photographs, 200 full-color posters, postcards, oral history interviews, biographical materials, radio scripts, buttons, badges, uniforms, and a rifle. The Tamiament Library continues to build the Abraham Lincoln Battalion archives. Currently, there are 3 memorials dedicated to the Abraham Lincoln Battalion veterans. The first is located on the University of Washington campus in Seattle, and the second is in James Madison Park in Madison, Wisconsin. The third memorial dedicated to the Abraham Lincoln Battalion veterans was unveiled on March 30, 2008, at the Embarcadero in San Francisco, California. Speakers at the monument's unveiling included San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom and several surviving Union veterans. The poem, Jarama Valley, written by Alex McDade, a poet, writer, and worker from Glasgow, was later set to music and became the anthem of the Lincoln Battalion. Alex McDade was one of the first casualties of the Battle of Jarama Valley on July 6, 1937. Delmer Berg, known as the last surviving member of the Lincoln Battalion, passed away on February 28, 2016, at the age of 100. Berg said in 2014, "I think staying politically active keeps me alive. It fills my life. I haven't slowed down at all. I'm still right in the middle of things." So what has been the attitude of United States presidents towards the memory of American citizens who volunteered to fight the Spanish Civil War to defend democracy and combat fascism? Absolutely nothing. The agreement signed in Madrid on September 23, 1953, stipulated that in exchange for economic and military aid, 5 U.S. bases would be established on Spanish soil. Thus, the U.S. and its allies, by granting support to the nationalist and repressive Francisco Franco regime, which had come to power with the backing of the Axis powers, began to lift and ease international pressure and isolation on Spain. The U.S., wanting Spain to contribute to the development of the defense capabilities of what they claimed was an economically and freely developing world by utilizing its human resources, was forced to support the Franco regime. Ultimately, it was impossible to expect a positive attitude from the United States government and presidents, who were rivals to the Soviet Union and the Communist Front, towards their socialist citizens who volunteered to fight in the Spanish Civil War. The actions of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion were not officially supported by the United States. Its members were investigated by the FBI. They faced oppression and discrimination from the state in many places. They had difficulty finding employment. Leaders of the Lincoln Battalion were investigated for leading American citizens to their deaths. On April 29, 1953, they were included on the Attorney General's list of subversive organizations. In 1985, President Ronald Reagan stated in an interview that they were on the wrong side. So, were the efforts of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion and the International Brigades fruitless? Some say yes, others say no. If the Soviet Union and the Yugoslav government had continued their strong support in the Spanish Civil War, and if Britain and France, who disliked fascist regimes in Europe, had contributed, the International Brigades and the Abraham Lincoln Battalion could have succeeded, and the Spanish Republic could have survived. On the other hand, even if Franco had not lost the war and Spain had been politically divided, due to the fascist Axis powers having lost in World War II, Francisco Franco's supporters might have given in to the Republican government, and the country could have regained its political unity. It is known that U.S. President Truman took a stance against Francisco Franco when World War II ended. However, this situation changed during the terms of subsequent presidents. Putting aside all the debates, there is one undeniable fact: young, idealistic people in their 20s, the prime of their lives, fought and died or were injured defending the republic and democracy of another nation. Francisco Franco died on November 20, 1975. He ruled Spain for over 40 years. After his death, right-wing and left-wing parties agreed on the painful past and the memory of fascist history, deciding to close the Franco era. On February 23, 1981, Lieutenant Colonel Antonio Teguero, a Franco supporter, and 200 armed gendarmerie officers entered the Chamber of Deputies in Madrid and staged a coup. Members of parliament who were voting were taken hostage. Shots were fired. King Juan Carlos of Spain opposed the coup, appearing on state television in his capacity as commander-in-chief and in uniform, condemning the coup and warning soldiers not to support the coup plotters. The next morning, the coup plotters surrendered. Starting in 2007, the Spanish government began removing names and symbols associated with the Franco regime. Government buildings and streets that had been altered were renamed. In March 2005, the equestrian statue of Franco in Madrid was removed. But fascist supporters didn't fail to salute the statue. The last Franco-era statue was removed from Santander in 2008. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments section.